Well, welcome everybody. This is a presentation on electric cars. They've been in the news a lot lately, just with the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better. I wanted to invite Dave Roberts to speak on electric cars, and I've also invited Joan Carson and John Hammerslaw to talk at the end a little bit. They both own electric cars, so they're going to tell us what it's like owning and driving an electric car. If everybody could please mute your microphones. We'll do questions at the end. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to introduce you, Dave. Dave Roberts is the coordinator of the Drive Electric Vermont program. He's supported transportation electrification programs as a leading expert in Vermont for nearly 10 years in this position. Prior to that, he worked as a transportation planner and engineer for the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. Dave has personally driven EVs in Vermont since the winter of 2013. That's a long time. So has experience with driving electric in all sorts of conditions, which is what we Vermonters want to hear about. So Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you. And after you speak, we'll hear from Joan Carson and John Hammerslaw about their electric car experiences as well.
Great, thanks so much, Diane. Glad to be here with everybody today, sharing a little information about electric cars. I put a link in the chat to some of the slides I'll be running through. I'm going to share my screen here in a minute. I've got about 20 slides, so hopefully I'll get through them. I'll probably be moving fairly quickly, but happy to take questions. Hopefully we should have some time for a discussion at the end. And if folks have questions as I go, maybe you could put them in the chat if you're comfortable doing that, and then they'll be there and we can run through them toward the end of our time today. So I'm going to share. And we're good. Get a thumbs up from anybody. You guys seeing my screen? Yes, great. All right. So a little bit about Drive Electric Vermont. We're a public-private partnership. I've been doing this work for about 10 years between VEIC, which is where I work. It's a nonprofit. We're based in Winooski, and the state of Vermont. VEIC also operates Efficiency Vermont, which is the statewide, except for Burlington, energy efficiency utility. And we've been working on a lot of different fronts over that period of time. You know, back 10 years ago, it was a lot of conversations about policy and getting ready for electric vehicles. And now, as we see more model availability in the state and more interest, we're sort of shifting to programs to make sure that Vermonters know about the incentives that are available. So some of the more consumer education outreach is becoming a greater focus for us. But still doing all the other things, particularly a lot of conversations around charging infrastructure development right now as a result of the infrastructure bill. So a few of the more common reasons people are making the switch to electric cars. I mean, certainly from an environmental perspective, there are significant emission reduction benefits, but they also have great performance. The electric motors have a lot of zip. So for people who haven't had the opportunity to go for a ride or drive an electric car, that can often be pretty surprising that even the more affordable models still have great performance compared to, say, a comparable gasoline-powered vehicle. And they're nice and quiet, so you can have conversations in the car, you can listen to music. It's just a more pleasant driving experience. You can charge them at home for most people. And that's the least cost, easiest way to do it. For folks who have cell phones, it's kind of similar to cell phones. A lot of times you just sort of plug it in when you get home and it's ready to go in the morning. So that for a lot of people, it's really great. You never have to stop at a gas station again. And then savings. So they do tend to cost more upfront, although with incentives, that's not always the case. But over time, you can save significantly on fuel and maintenance costs with most EVs. So those are sort of top 5 reasons, and I'll get into a little more detail on many of these in my talk. So just a little background in terms of some of the policy issues around transportation electrification in the state. Transportation is the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. It's about 45% of our state's emissions. And while there are certainly other ways to reduce transportation emissions, walking, bicycling, using public transportation, for folks who are, we're seeing with COVID, a lot more working from home and other what are called transportation demand management programs. Those are all typically the best way to go about reducing emissions from an environmental perspective. But for a lot of Vermonters, they really rely on their cars for transportation and maybe live in areas that aren't well served by public transportation or difficult trips to walk and bike. So for people who continue to drive over their lifetime, electric vehicles produce far less emissions than gasoline counterparts. And that's taking into consideration the manufacturing footprint of the batteries. There is still work to be done on that front, particularly around some of the sourcing of raw materials, cobalt and lithium, commonly referred to. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the industry to address those issues in our discussion. But just wanted to make sure people are aware of some of the benefits here and that there are things happening in the industry that will, further reduce the environmental impacts of EVs in the future. There's 2 primary types of plug-in electric vehicles. You've got all electric, shown on the left here, powered solely by the battery, and depending on the model and conditions, you get anywhere from 70 to over 300 miles. These days, there's some EVs pushing 400 miles of range on the battery. And then the second type is plug-in hybrids, which are basically have a little bit smaller batteries, so you can get 15 to 80 miles of electric range on the battery. It can be plugged in to charge, but then they also still have a gasoline tank and an internal combustion engine. So if you're on a longer trip, you don't necessarily need to worry about where you're going to stop to charge. It'll just seamlessly switch from running on the battery after 30 or 40 miles in most cases to running on gasoline. And historically in Vermont, the plug-in hybrids have been a more popular option, but we're seeing that shift as we see more affordable, longer range all-electric models hitting the market. Some of those popular models on the left are all-electric, right, or plug-in hybrids. So, just kind of running through a couple of these. Chevrolet Bolt is 260-mile of range. The price before any incentives might come into play, starting base price is around $31,000. Tesla Model 3 comes in a few different varieties. So there's a more affordable model that actually I need to update the slide. I see it's starting now a little over $40,000, but and then there's a longer range model with a bigger battery that gets significantly more range, but you pay for that, a little more money. Nissan Leaf similarly comes in sort of a base version with 150-mile range, and then a plus version that has over 200-mile range. A lot of these vehicles are front-wheel drive on the left. The Tesla Model 3 has an option for all-wheel drive. On the right, the Subaru Crosstrek hybrid and the Toyota RAV4 Prime plug-in hybrids do have all-wheel drive standard, which a lot of people are looking for these days. And we do have, a few more models that are sort of recent or coming soon. Higher end, longer range, all electrics. They've got the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid, a more affordable plug-in hybrid that's sort of a crossover style that's very popular. One that I would call out is the Ford F-150 Lightning electric pickup truck. You can put in a reservation for one of those now, and hopefully deliveries will be starting sometime later next year if you get your reservation in. And the F-150 is the most registered vehicle in the state of Vermont right now. So that will be a really important sort of market need that will be filled as those start hitting the market. we've got on the Drive Electric Vermont website, which is driveelectricvt.com, we have this vehicle comparison tool that will allow you to sort of filter for different types of vehicles, price, all-wheel drive, whether it's eligible for some of the incentives. So you can sort of click the little plus next to a vehicle and see some more information, including some lease pricing information from the manufacturer, which a lot of people are leasing electric vehicles because it's a newer technology. It's advantageous in the way that the federal tax credit can work with leasing. It gets rolled into the lease, so you don't need to worry about some of the eligibility issues with the tax credit. So lots of information on the Drive Electric site, and want to make sure you're aware of that. There are other electric options in the works. There are a couple electric buses running in Burlington now through Green Mountain Transit. We've got some electric school buses that have just hit the road, including in the CVU school district at the Allenbrook School, and more to come. We've got some commercial vehicles in addition to pickup trucks, sort of work vans are coming in Burlington. There's car shares is using electric vehicles. There's electric lawn care equipment, so mowers and things like that. Some of the utilities have incentives for electric mowers, electric bikes and motorcycles. So lots of options if you're not shopping for a car. Some of these are great ways to get around and reduce emissions. A lot of people wonder how EVs do in Vermont conditions. So you will get less range on the coldest winter days. Depending on the vehicle and how cold it is, we usually say kind of worst case scenarios, you would see half of what the official manufacturer estimate of range is. So if you're driving a Chevrolet Bolt that's supposed to get 260 miles of range, on a morning when the vehicle's been left outside in the driveway, it's 5 below Fahrenheit, you might see 130, 140 miles of range on that vehicle, especially if you're running the heating system to warm up as you're driving around. So there are some things you can do to kind of reduce the hit on range. Some vehicles have cold weather packages with different sort of more efficient heating systems or battery heaters that help keep the range up in the wintertime. Heat pumps, some of the EVs have heat pump heating systems that are more efficient than the sort of traditional heat systems in vehicles, electric vehicles. Heated seats and steering wheels are more efficient than using the cabin heat. So sometimes people who are on longer trips, maybe they put a blanket on their lap or keep their jacket on and use the heated seats and steering wheels and minimize their use of the cabin heat. But for a lot of people these days, it's gotten, back when I started driving EVs 10 years ago with an 80-mile, roughly, Nissan Leaf, you would see maybe 40 miles of range in the winter. These days, with a lot of the cars that have over 200 miles of range or plug-in hybrids, you don't need to be quite as concerned about this stuff unless you're really on a longer distance trip, which is great. There are, hopefully in the future, we'll see some advancements to battery technology, which will mean some of these impacts are reduced. But for now, pretty much all the automakers are using lithium-ion batteries. And while they come in a little bit different chemistries and flavors, the bottom line is that they pretty much all have some reduced range in cold weather conditions. A little bit on costs of driving electric. So this is comparing costs for somebody driving a gasoline vehicle that gets about 25 miles per gallon, going roughly 1,000 miles a month or 12,000 miles a year. This is what their savings might look like versus electric. So gasoline prices have really fluctuated. You can see they really went down in 2020 with COVID, not many people driving, but they've steadily increased, and now we're up above where they were before COVID. While electric rates do fluctuate, it's not nearly as significant as gasoline. They are regulated, so you wouldn't expect to see the same kind of large increase in prices that you see with gasoline. So just comparing sort of the Vermont average electric rate with gasoline, it's about $2,000 in savings on fuel over, if sort of looking back over the past 5 years for somebody. And in many cases, people can get even more savings if they get on an off-peak rate offered by their electric utility. So Burlington Electric and Green Mountain Power both have lower off-peak rates, and some of the other utilities are working on them or have sort of whole house time of use rates for off-peak charging as well. And then beyond the fuel cost savings, there are still some additional savings on maintenance. So typically expect to see, with particularly with all electric vehicles, you're not going to have oil changes or a lot of the moving parts that are associated with internal combustion engine vehicles go away. So they're just simpler, less to go wrong. We're seeing fleets that have adopted EVs have really significant savings. There's less wear and tear on brakes because of the regenerative braking systems that essentially turn the electric motor back into a generator and put energy back into the battery rather than using the mechanical brakes. So all of these things add up to what Consumer Reports says total ownership savings of about $6,000 to $10,000 over the life of a vehicle. A little bit on charging. So most charging for most people happens at home. It's 80% or more of charging based on data that we've seen on charging behaviors. The next most common place after that would be a workplace. So if somebody's office provides charging, sometimes it's free or sort of just covering the electric costs at an office, that would be the next popular option. And then public charging is needed for a lot of folks, especially driving all electric vehicles, but it's not something most drivers use on a regular basis. It's more for longer road trips, things like that. So thinking about some of the different types of charging, for level 1 charging, this is what comes standard with the vehicles. On the left here, this is just a standard 120 volt plug that can plug into an outlet in a garage or near where you park your vehicle. Typically the cord's about 20 feet long. So if you have an outlet near where you park a car that will reach, you'll get about 5 miles of range per hour of charging on this type of equipment. So it works fine for some people, especially if you're driving a plug-in hybrid that's maybe got 40 miles of range. It'll give you a full charge overnight. But for a lot of people driving the longer range, all electric vehicles, it's definitely more convenient to step up to the next type of charger. So this would be a level 2 charger. It's wired to a 240 volt circuit or plugs into a 240 volt receptacle. And these plugs are some examples of 240 volt receptacles that some people might have. If anybody has an RV, a lot of RVs use this. It's called a NEMA 1450 receptacle, and there's chargers that can plug right into that. So if you have one of those in your garage or near where you park, you can charge an EV off of it. On the left is more the type of charging that you would see at a public location. So this is from a company called ChargePoint. And the way that this works is you have an account with ChargePoint that's connected to your credit card, and whoever operates that station sets the pricing. It's usually around $1 an hour or so, and you use your ChargePoint account to access it and charge your car, and then ChargePoint charges you a fee, and then they pass through most of the funds that they collect to whoever owns that charging equipment. So that's for public charging. On the right, this would be more kind of just a basic home charger that doesn't have any payment systems or anything like that. And these home chargers run around $500-$600 depending, but a lot of utilities, Green Mountain Power included, have programs to provide either free or sort of a rebate on home charging equipment. So happy to talk more about that if there's interest. On the right is the top tier of charging. So you're going with level 1 from 5 miles of range to level 2 to 10 to 20 miles of range per hour of charging. To fast charging, you can get up to 1,000 miles of range per hour of charging. Or really what that means is you'll be done charging your 200 or 300 mile range EV in 20 to 30 minutes at the upper end. So fast charging is something you would see sort of along higher travel corridors and places like that. And oftentimes it's really only for the all electric vehicle models. So plug-in hybrids can do level 1 and 2 charging, but most of them don't do fast charging because they just figure you'll run on gas if you're on a longer road trip. There are, for level 1 and 2, everybody except for Tesla uses the same type of plug. It's called a J1772, and Tesla has an adapter that will work with their plug. For fast charging, there are 2 different types of plugs in addition to Tesla. One that Nissan and Mitsubishi use called CHAdeMO, and one that basically everybody else use. And fortunately, most of the charging equipment that's gone in the past few years has both plugs, but that's something that if you're looking at a particular EV model, you can use some of the charging apps. This is a map from PlugShare that will show the level 2 chargers in green and the fast chargers in orange. And you can use the app to just show chargers that are compatible with your vehicle. So if there's a location that doesn't have the right plug for your car, it won't show up on the map and you won't be misled if you're trying to use it on a longer distance trip. And currently in Vermont, we've got over 300 locations with charging, about 30 with fast charging. It's the highest per capita rate of charging in the country right now, which is great. I mean, Vermont is a small state population-wise, so maybe not entirely surprising, but still, we're doing pretty good. But there's still some gaps in fast charging in particular. You can see the kind of Northeast Kingdom area. There's no fast charging available up here. And the state has funded about 17 more locations for additional fast charging that will be coming online in the next year or so, we hope. Tesla has their own dedicated network of fast charging called superchargers. So for anybody who does a lot of road trips or doesn't want to worry about where they're plugging in on longer distance travel, Tesla really has things figured out in a much more seamless way. You can sit in the front seat of a Tesla and use their in-vehicle navigation system to say you want to drive from Richmond, Vermont to Key West, Florida, and it would tell you each stop you want to make and for how long. So it's a really nice system, but unfortunately, currently only open for Tesla drivers. They are experimenting with opening this network to other drivers in Europe right now, and perhaps somewhere in the future, it will become more widely available in the US and North America. Transitioning from charging to talking a little bit about some of the incentives that are available. This is just an example using a new Nissan Leaf, which has a base starting price of $27,400. This is, I should mention that right now, inventory at dealers is in very short supply because of the supply chain issues associated with COVID and an industry chip shortage. So it probably be pretty hard to find a Leaf at this price right now, but hopefully in the next few months, things will be getting a little more normal and some of the prices will, also get more normal. So assuming that you could find a Leaf at this price, there's a federal tax credit of $7,500. There's a state incentive. There's sort of a standard state incentive amount of $2,500 for an all-electric vehicle. For somebody in a lower income household, that is increased from $2,500 to $4,000. There's also, Nissan has frequently offered sort of an automaker discount of a couple $1,000s. And then there are utility incentives for most Vermonters that vary a little bit, but often are a little bit higher for lower income as well. So it can bring the cost from 27,000 some dollars down to roughly $13,000 or even less for someone who's lower income. Important to note, though, that this federal tax credit right now, it may be difficult for a lower income person to get the full benefit of that because it's not a refundable tax credit. You have to owe enough taxes to be able to, essentially write it off or get that full benefit. There are, as part of the Build Back Better bill that's still being debated in Congress, there are changes to the tax credit that would make it better, more universal, if you will. So the value of it could be transferred to a finance entity or some other things that would make it much easier for somebody who doesn't have that tax liability to get the full benefit. And we do have more information on all of these incentives on the Drive Electric Vermont website, which has a really handy incentive calculator where you can put in your utility, the type of vehicle that you're looking at, the make of the vehicle, and then there's some questions around tax filing status and adjusted gross income, which can be found on your tax return, because that's what's used for some of the eligibility and requirements for the state of Vermont's incentive program. So if you're curious, what incentives you may qualify for, this is where to head, and it'll break out the various the three primary levels of utility incentives, the state incentives, and any federal tax credit that's available. And then there's a lot more detail on the page that you can navigate to on more specifics related to all of those offerings. And that is what I wanted to cover. So I'm really that we've got a few EV drivers on the line today to speak some about their experience. It's always great to hear more from those folks. So I don't know, I guess Joan and John, if you want to, if anybody has any burning questions, or Diane, if there's anything I missed, maybe now can just pause and address those, but otherwise look forward to hearing from Joan and John.
All right. Well, I'll start if you like.
Thanks, John.
This is John Hammerslaw, and I've had a 2017 Bolt, which I had leased for a while, 3 years, and I thought it was very good. It's like you said, maintenance is very low on it. You don't have any oil changes, you don't have any belts to replace. It's easy on the tires as long as you don't push down on the accelerator pedal too much. There is a pad on the steering wheel that lets you slow down using the more quickly with the Bolt anyway. That does it through the engine instead of through the brakes. That's one thing though that I found out I wasn't using my brakes enough, and so they got rust spots on the discs, and I had to replace the discs. So you got to use your brakes once in a while. I'm used to coasting up to stop signs and lights and everything, and it wasn't good enough for my my brakes to be held up. But other than that, it was a wonderful car. I liked it so much that I turned it in and bought a 2020 Bolt Premier, which has all the bells and whistles to it. It has this the thing that's in a lot of cars right now, where if you go off to the side, it gently turns you to one side or the other, and also crossing lanes, things like that. Also, it's this one has, of course, heated seats and steering wheel, and that does come in very handy when you're in cold weather and you don't really want to use your heater. Your heater does take up quite a bit of energy in the beginning, warming up and everything, but it's still adequate. What else can I say? It's very quiet, very fast. It's a direct drive, and there's no gear changes or anything, and it's quite fast off the line. And you can easily be careful. You got to be careful because you could easily go up to 75, 80 in no time at all.
Where do you do most of your charging?
I do most of my charging at home. Right in when I got the 2017 Bolt, Green Mountain Power, which I'm on, offered me this garage charger for free. It was but they control it if it's off-peak, which saves me quite a bit of money. But you do have the option of turning that down, and you'll just pay a little bit more. Like if you're really stuck for energy and it's like a cold, really cold day, and they're drawing a lot of electricity. They say you can't do it, but you can override that, right? And the other thing is you can set your charge at a certain time off peak. For instance, I charge and I say, okay, I'll be leaving the house at about 6 o'clock. I put in 5 o'clock that it ends, and the car decides when it starts to charge. Doesn't take me that long with that charger. It usually starts about 11 o'clock, sometimes later than that, charge there. One thing also to consider is we don't have this problem too much here in Vermont, but down in the southern states, they have to use their air conditioner a lot. And like us in the winter, they're using their air conditioner, and that draws a lot of energy as well. Okay. I haven't taken any really long trips with my car. The farthest I've gone is over towards Schenectady, Albany, New York. Okay, that's pretty much the farthest I've gone. And I was very lucky that my son lived close to Central Park there, and at that park there was a level 1 charger, so I was less than a 2-minute walk away from his house, and so I was able to just plug my car in overnight and charge it. And on the way back at the Adirondack Customer Welcome Center, they have a fast charger there that's for free. So but there are other places, like you'll see Hannaford's have these chargers also. A fast charge. I don't know if it's a fast charger over in there, but I think it is.
Yep.
Most of them, a lot of Hannafords have those. Okay. Questions from you folks? Anything? Yeah, Kathleen.
Yes, I was wondering, as far as Vermont, the hills, when you have to go up the hills or whatever, I'm not trying to, generalize or whatever, but a lot of times on the interstate, whenever there's a slow car, it's like a Prius or something. And so I'm just wondering, you said it goes fast, but
yeah,
I'm just wondering fast. On the hills.
French Hill, I've driven it up Bolton Valley. I worked up at Bolton Valley during the winter time, and I have snow tires for it on all 4 tires in the winter time. I think that's essential, even though it's a heavy car. Mine weighs 4,427 pounds. And that's all battery, mostly battery, but plenty of power to go up any of the hills you want,
The other thing is when you compare the Prius to the, one of the other battery electric cars, the Prius is very, very light. I've owned both a Prius and a couple of EVs, so I know that it manages hills and things much better. Plus, a lot of the EVs are all-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Joan, why don't we segue into you talking now, and just to make sure we get everything in.
Okay. So I live in Huntington, and I started with a Prius back in the 1990s. And then I went to a Leaf when, I guess the same as Dave, 90-mile range on a good day. And on a bad day, 60-mile range. And then I really, really liked the Leaf a lot. And then I transitioned to the Tesla Model Y. And then Tesla Model 3, and then the Tesla Model Y. And there's a couple things that I just wanted to point out. One is about the range. You can preheat your car. If you think about going from 0 outdoor temperature up to 65 or 70 inside your car, you're using a lot of energy to do that. And so if you do that while you're plugged in before you go any place, then you're saving a little bit of battery. Then the second thing is that air conditioning, you're usually going from 80 down to 70 versus heating, you're going from 30 to 70. So you have, with heat, you have to go further and use more energy to get to your temperature goal. And then the other thing I wanted to say is, I wanted to say something about the wheels. I've had difficulty with my tires being used up by the EV. I went through a set of winter tires and a brand new set of winter tires, and they didn't pass inspection the second time. So I've heard a lot of different things. Maybe Dave, you have some information about this, but I've heard a lot of different things in terms of why the tires wear longer. But I'm a little confused about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect more than one season. Winter tires in general, usually, they don't have the same kind of mileage warranties that sort of all season or summer tires might have, because the rubber compounds are softer, so they, have some traction in the winter, which is what you want. So, it is true that the torque, especially in the Teslas, which are, pretty powerful vehicles, it may be a combination of just different factors. But I personally, of course, I don't drive a ton of miles, but I've had one pair of winter tires that I've been using for 3 or 4 winters now, and they seem to be holding up okay. So I don't know if it's one-off with your particular tires and the compounds that were used. So I would expect more than one season for sure, as long as you're not really piling on the miles or smoking your tires, which I imagine you're not doing, I'm sure. But yeah.
I have been on many different forums about it, and there's a lot of talk about it, but I don't feel like people have come to a consensus about it. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when I had the Leaf, I was working both in Montpelier and in Burlington, and the first winter that I drove the Nissan, I was only plugging it into my 110 outlet, and it was enough to get me, the next morning to have enough to travel to wherever my destination was, but it didn't give me enough to then go out to dinner, after I got home, and I had a lot of close calls. I was like, I'd drive to Montpelier and plug in there at a public station, and then I'd get home and I'd plug in again, and I'd just barely get enough charge back again to get to Burlington and then charge again. So once I got the level 2 charger, I was in range heaven. I was like, oh my gosh, I can go anywhere now. So I would definitely recommend a level 2 charger at your home.
Scott, why don't you go ahead?
Hi. I'm going to turn the video on. On the subject of level 2 chargers, Dave told us that the price is $500 to $600, and it's often comped by utilities. But I was wondering how much it costs to install one at your home.
That's a really good question, because in my case, I have a heat pump in my house, and I had a 150 amp service. And it turns out that that service and the line from my house, which was built in 1988, the line from the road to my house couldn't handle both the heat pump and the charger. And so I had to upgrade my service to a 200 amp service, and that became more expensive. So we got the free charger, but we paid a lot of money to do that. But most houses, you probably can do the charger. But relatively inexpensively, a few $100s. The other thing that cost more money for me is that I don't have a garage. And so they had to bury the line even deeper. And so that added additional costs to the installation. But if you already have a garage and you're putting the charger right in the garage, that would save you a lot of money.
How much was it for the outdoor installation and the buried line, not counting the
upgrade
installation of the new service? Yeah,
it was a few $100. It was like $500, maybe $600.
John, you have a question?
I just wanted to comment that I had my charger originally in my house in Jonesville, and I brought that charger with me. I was able to bring that charger with me to where I live now and install it there.
Yeah, it is important to note the utilities will provide, like Green Mountain Power will provide the charger for free, but they don't cover the installation. So it is on the customer, it's on you to cover that install. And as it's been said, I mean, some people, if they have an RV and a 240 volt plug, it's ready to go. But most people don't have that. And, typical range would be sort of $400 or $500 to $1,000. Don't usually see over $1,000 unless somebody's really dealing with a lot of the types of things like shown, if you have to upgrade your whole service and those kinds of issues.
Dave, what is the life of an EV in general?
Well, we don't exactly know yet. There's EVs, some of those early Nissan Leafs and Volts from sort of 2010, 11 are still on the road. The batteries have less ability to hold a charge over time. In most cases, manufacturers put warranties of 8 years or 100,000 miles on the sort of vehicle drivetrains and batteries. So that would be kind of the minimum expected life. But longer term, certainly would anticipate 10 to 15 years, especially Vermont kind of benefits from our colder climate. Some of the issues with battery degradation over time have been more pronounced in hot climates, Texas, Arizona, Southern California. So it's not to say that the batteries won't degrade in Vermont, but it's one of the factors is temperature, and that's where we have an advantage here. So it is going to be model specific to a degree, though. So some Teslas have been holding up better than, say, early Nissan Leafs. Nissan changed the chemistry on the Leaf battery packs about 5 years ago to a new formula that's supposed to be a little more resistant to some of these long-term issues. So if folks are thinking about a used EV, you definitely want to do a little bit of research and make sure you know what you're getting, especially with some of those older Leafs. And one thing in particular with the Leaf has been that they have air-cooled batteries, whereas most other EVs have a liquid cooling system on the battery to pull heat off. And so those air-cooled batteries, again, not as good for maintaining the temperature and potentially a little more significant loss of range over time. You should be able to, recycle. The batteries can come out of the vehicle and be used in kind of second life applications for stationary energy storage, and then ultimately recycled. And industry is working on recycling to make sure that you can recover as much of the raw materials that are used as possible. But it's, a lot of these things are a work in progress because most EVs are still on the road with their original batteries. So it just hasn't been something that has really needed to be completely worked out.
Pauline has a question.
Yes, well, actually not a question. I recently ordered a Volkswagen ID4. A Volkswagen dealer shared that for me, I wouldn't be able to benefit from the federal tax deduction because I don't make enough money. So they said I should lease the car and I can convert it to a purchase at any time. they take the $7,500 deduction for their company. And that way I ended up with $14,000 incentives. So I just wanted to share that that might be possible for others.
Yeah,
That's important. Thank you.
That's a great option. As I mentioned, we'll see, but if Build Back Better, if that federal bill passes, then that will could change the way the tax credit works to make it easier for people in your position. But leasing should still be an option, and it's one that's been very popular. And even if you're planning to, leases typically have anywhere from 10 to 15,000 mile a year mileage requirements. So if you go over that and say a 3-year lease, you're paying in a lot of cases like 25 cents a mile. So it can be fairly costly if you're doing a lot of driving and planning to turn in the vehicle after 3 years. But if you buy it, if you lease it and at the end that you're planning to buy it out, which you can do with most leases, then that's a great way to get that tax credit. And not only do you not have to worry about the tax liability, it's sort of an instant thing that you get at the point of sale rather than having to claim it when you do your income taxes for the next year. So.
Scott, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm wondering, for Joan and John, what was your experience actually buying your electric vehicles? Did you order or did you go through a dealer? Was there any haggling? What was that like?
You go first, John.
They had the car, actually, my newer car, the 2020 that I bought, actually came down from Maine, and I was dealing with 3 different dealerships, Chevy dealerships, and going between them. So I did some haggling with them, and I came up with a better price, I think, than just taking it off the lot.
For me, Tesla, with the Leaf, I, dealt with the dealership in Burlington. Of course, now this was 10 years ago, something like that. And I felt like times have changed since then. I just want to say that, but I felt like they knew nothing about their car. And it was really frustrating. I felt like I had to tell them. And I don't remember there being any haggling. I hate haggling. But anyway, then with Tesla, there is no dealership in Vermont. And in fact, the law just changed this year that allows direct sales or service center to happen in Vermont now, as of last July. And so you order everything online, you deal with the financing, all that stuff is all online. They send you forms through DocuSign or whatever, and you do all of that. And then since they have no dealership in Vermont or service center in Vermont, you either have to go to Dedham, Mass, or you have to go to Latham, New York, where they'll deliver it to your driveway. And that's what I opted for. And as a matter of fact, I was in the hospital when they delivered my car, and I said, "I'm going to be in the hospital. Can you do it the week after or the week before?" And they said, "Don't worry, we'll just drop it off. We'll leave the key in. When you get home, check it out. And if you have any problem, call us. Or email us, and we will unlock it for you. And check it out. And if you have any problems, give us a call. And we'll deal with it." That's exactly what they did. So it was kind of nice.
Dave, somebody had a question about whether you could get incentives if it was a used car.
Yes, is the short answer. Not the incentives aren't as high. There aren't as many of them. But the incentive, and I put a link in the chat to the Drive Electric page with the incentive calculator. And if you say in the pull down that you're looking at a used all electric or plug-in hybrid, it will then give you some references to what incentives you're eligible for. But there are utility incentives, and there's a state program called Mileage Smart, which is only available for sort of lower to moderate income households. And you need to be pre-qualified through Mileage Smart before you buy the car. So you couldn't do it after the fact. You'd need to, get signed up with Mileage Smart before you buy the car. And we've got links on that Drive Electric page to the Mileage Smart resources. Right now, the federal tax credit is only for new vehicles, but as part of the Build Back Better draft bill, it would extend to used vehicles in the future. Although not, I think the amount of the tax credit would be about half what it would be for a new electric vehicle.
Okay. Kathleen, you have a question?
Yes, I was just wondering about Joan and John, like the part about I could go to Montpelier, I could go to Burlington and come home, but then I couldn't go out for dinner or whatever. I mean, it just sounds like really stressful as far as, you know, I don't want to run out of charge or whatever on the way home from between Burlington and Richmond.
So I will answer that because I want, you know, it was with my Nissan that was an early Nissan that only had a 90-mile range, and in the wintertime only had a 60-mile range. Now the Nissans, the Leaf is a really great car. I really liked it. It was small, and that's one of the reasons why I chose to go to another car. But, you know, you get much more range now, and so that is less of an issue. And the charging system is, you know, the infrastructure is much easier to access now. And so it's less of a difficulty. But I will say, when you first, John, maybe this is true for you, I don't know. I'm just a little weenie about these things, but I worried and obsessed about all sorts of things, like running out of charge and things. And I needed to get through a winter trying it out and never running out, you know, and being okay and realizing, you know, like the first time I used a public charger, like, you know, I fumbled with the nozzle and didn't know exactly what I was doing. And it's learning new things. I felt nervous about it, but it was fine. It, you know, like I can remember one time, and this again was with my early Leaf, you know, being on Shelburne Road, on Williston Road and trying to get to the charger at Healthy Living, and there being a traffic jam. And according to my little dashboard, I only had 5 miles left or something. And I was just like sweating about it, you know. And of course, when you're standing still in traffic, you're not using any energy hardly at all, right? And so you're just sitting there in traffic. But I was like sure that I was going to be left in the road and people would be honking at me. And in fact, I did make it, and I charged and I was fine. So I don't know, John, what your experience was.
My experience was an experimental one to see how far my 2017 Volt could go. Actually, I started with about 230 miles, and I drove it all the way back and forth many times to Waterbury and then to Burlington, and coming back from Waterbury and Jonesville, where I used to live. I was just about to the railroad track crossing, and my lights blinking like mad, and I kind of coasted into my driveway. But that's the only time I've come close to running out. You know, like Joan said, there's, you know, they hold a lot more mileage now than they used to. I can regularly get on my 2017. I could regularly get 230, 250 miles on a charge. You know, I'm getting a little bit better than that with my 220, my 2020 Volt.
It is new. Yeah, it is new technology. So I think, you know, I'm in my late 60s and I've driven you know, forever and ever, but this is different. And so it does take a little bit of getting used to. Also, when it says that you're out of power, it actually gives you, you know, you still have more. It's sort of like when your gas tank says you're on empty, you really actually can go a little bit further. I also wanted to say that I have driven to Buffalo and back, and to Rhode Island and back, and to Maine, to Camden, Maine, and back. And it's, you know, there are charging stations everywhere, and I haven't had any trouble finding a place to charge. But they're fewer and farther apart than the typical gas station. And
there will be more charging, not just in Vermont, but elsewhere. New Hampshire has been a little further behind, but they have a process underway right now to spend some of the Volkswagen diesel settlement dollars on EV charging, and Maine's been doing that as part of the infrastructure bill. States are getting additional funds. So as I said, for longer distance travel, if you're worried about it, Tesla is really a superior option for a lot of people. But there are people who've driven Leafs cross country. It can certainly be done. Just need to do a little bit of planning. Make sure you have some backup options in case charging isn't working, because that is one unfortunate thing that we're working on, is making sure the charging gets more reliable, especially some of the fast chargers, the non-Tesla fast chargers. A lot of the locations just have one fast charger. If it's out of service, it's not good. So most of the locations that the state is putting in the next year or so will have at least 2 chargers per location. So there's at least some redundancy, and should see a lot more of that in the future.
So we just have a couple of minutes left, but John, why don't you go ahead then, Kathleen?
Just real quick, to find a charger, you have several apps on your phone. So it gives you where they are, how much to charge, the amenities around it, all types of things like that. Okay, so it's not impossible to find them. It's very easy, actually.
Great, thanks, John. Kathleen?
I'm just wondering about, as far as, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm wondering about the part that, I don't know if John and Joan, if they both have solar, on their house, how much more does your electric bill go up because of this charging? And does that offset it? And then you've seen these commercials that says you can't wash your window because you didn't get any gas. And, so somebody puts 89 cents in, probably, I guess that's the one that's the hybrid. So I guess I'm just wondering, has that been figured out yet?
So we've got, I'll let Joan and John respond too, but we have a tool on the Drive Electric website that talks about cost of ownership, and you can look at, based on electric rate and how much driving you do, your electric bill should go up, but it will be less than what you were paying for gas otherwise. So, it's offset, and depending on how much driving you do, it could be anywhere from $25 to $50 a month additional on your electric bill typically, but it really depends on how much driving you do, and if you're on one of those lower off-peak electric rates, that can really, help save some money. Solar can help too, for folks who have good structures for solar, but it's certainly not a requirement by any means.
Yeah, I don't have solar, but somebody told me, and it sounds about right, but maybe you can tell me, Dave. Somebody said it's like the equivalent of paying about $1 a gallon for gas, and I don't know if that's true or not, but yeah,
that's
definitely.
For the GMP off-peak rate. That's the rough equivalent, and for somebody just on sort of the average residential rate in Vermont, it's closer to $1.50 a gallon equivalent.
Yeah. I only wanted to say one other thing, and that is seriously, if anybody's interested in contacting me or wants to drive the car, come on down. I'm happy to go over every detail you want to hear.
Myself also. If you ever want to ride or know more about it, just contact me.
That's great, Joan and John. I bet people will. I appreciate that. That's wonderful. Listen, Dave, thanks so much for doing this. You did a great job. The presentation was clear, and I think we all benefited from it. And thanks everybody for coming, and thanks John and Joan for sharing your experience.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. All right.
Thanks, Dave.